Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Lonely Podcast weekly recommendations, where I recommend the movie, book, and podcast of the week. So, let's start. The podcast of the week is Jordan Peterson hosting Sam Harris on the Jordan Peterson Podcast. Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris just simply disagree on several topics. It somehow created this impression that those two are some sort of enemies or on opposite sides, which I think is completely inaccurate. The main point of contention between the two was obviously religion. So while Sam Harris dedicated a large portion of his career to basically break down and criticize religious doctrines and consider it to be some sort of a net negative, Peterson actually did the opposite, dug into those religious doctrines and tried to amplify some of it. I'm talking about Christianity and Judaism in particular, and really promoted them as net positive contributions to the world. Now, in this specific conversation, Peterson, as the host of the podcast, really insisted to find a common ground and points of agreement between the two, in particular with regard to the question of the fundamental good versus the fundamental evil. Now, I'm a very big fan of both of those thinkers, and I was really delighted to see those two converse in such a way. In the last 2 years or so, maybe more, Sam Harris was subject to a lot of criticism coming from the quote-unquote the intellectual dark web. The criticism was mostly around Harris's reaction to COVID-19 and also his perception of Trump. Now, I actually thought throughout this entire time that Harris is mostly misunderstood than anything else. I never attributed malice to any of his statements, even though some of them have been extremely controversial. So this specific conversation is one of the first time that Harris is actually going back to talk to one of those individuals, specifically Dr. Jordan Peterson, who is such an important figure in this domain. And those two actually don't exchange any punches. They truly converse and talk about their very minuscule disagreements on how can you define or find the fundamental good versus the fundamental evil. This is a long conversation. It might be tiring. It requires a lot of focus and attention, and it's fairly complicated. So if you want to listen to it, I recommend be in a space where you can be focused and have the time to really think about it. Jordan Peterson hosting Sam Harris on the Jordan Peterson Podcast. Now, the movie of the week. So, the movie of the week is Maestro. Okay, Maestro is a new movie released on Netflix starring Bradley Cooper, who also directed and wrote this movie. The movie tells the biographical story of Leonard Bernstein, who was one of the best composers and conductors in America and in the world for a long period of time. I know there was some criticism about this movie. Some people said, it was hard to follow, it was too long, hard to watch, couldn't get to the end of it, stuff like that. I also note that Cooper was criticized because he was using this prosthetic nose to portray Bernstein's character, and some folks hinted that this might be some sort of an anti-Semitic, there's some sort of an anti-Semitic element to it. I think it's bullshit. I think it's completely untrue. Coming from a Jew, by the way. Personally, I thought it was a very good movie. I think that Bradley Cooper did an amazing job portraying Leonard Bernstein, who is a very complicated character that is extremely hard to capture effectively in such a movie. And for that, I think he truly did a wonderful job. Additionally, I also think that the movie itself was beautifully shot. There are some scenes that are truly wonderful, like aesthetically beautiful scenes. There's one scene in particular when Bernstein's wife is standing kind of in the shadow of the stage, looking at Bernstein conducting one of the concerts, and there's a lot of symbolism there about her being like the wife in the shadow of her husband, etc. But overall, it was really a beautiful scene in terms of its aesthetic. Yes, this movie is long. There maybe are some scenes that I would have given up on, but overall, I think it's really good. It is deep, it's interesting, it is clever, it's funny, it's super moving and touching, and it's overall really wonderful. So, movie of the week, Maestro. Lastly, the book of the week. Book of the week is The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. The Metamorphosis was published in 1915. In its original language, German, it was written by probably one of the best authors that ever lived, Franz Kafka. The book starts with the following line. One morning, when Gregor Samsa woke from troubled dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a horrible vermin. This is the first line of the story, and from that on, the story continues to see what happens to Gregor Samsa, and most importantly, what happens around Gregor Samsa with his family. I would say a few things about this book. First, it is a really incredible story about life and the evilness of the human mind. So much have been written about this, so much have been said about this story, that I feel that actually recommending it might be a bit silly, but I will still do that because I simply think it's absolutely one of the must-read stories. The second thing I say is about the picture that I specifically picked for the cover of the story, which was the actual original cover as it was published in 1915. Now, the reason I picked this one is because Franz Kafka did not want anyone to actually paint the quote-unquote horrible vermin. And also, when you read the book, it is extremely unclear what kind of vermin is that. At one point, it is big enough to stand up. In another point, it is small enough to walk on the ceiling. It is extremely unclear. But this is a rare picture because most of the covers that you find today do depict some sort of an insect at the cover of the book, which I think is unfortunate, but this is the reality. If you've never read The Metamorphosis, I highly recommend you to do that, but don't do it by yourself. Do it with a friend or a bunch of friends and talk about it. Stop after every few paragraphs and try to talk and think about what everything means. And in addition to that, maybe you want to also read it when you read some sort of a commentary on that, and you can easily find it online. The most important thing here is this: if you never read this book, do yourself a favor and read it, because it is truly a masterpiece. Okay, so to wrap it up, the podcast of the week, Jordan Peterson hosting Sam Harris on the Jordan Peterson Podcast. Movie of the week, Maestro. And the book of the week, The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. I hope you'll have a good weekend and a happy new year. May 2024 be much better than 2023. Thank you for listening and hope you enjoyed it.